Alright, good morning everyone. It's a lovely fall morning here in Chicago, and we're doing what you should be doing every fall, and that's doing a thorough rig inspection on your boat. We're on a very well-maintained Beneteau 36.7. We're going to start at the top and work our way down. Just with any rig inspection, we're just going to use our eyes and our hands to feel and visually inspect everything that we can with the rig up. And the reason we do this in fall is always so we can have a good plan for our winter maintenance to make sure that we're ready next spring. It's always a little scary when somebody asks you in spring to do the rig inspection, because you always know you're going to find something and it's going to have to be fixed in a hurry. Doing it now gives us the luxury of being able to wait for parts, being able to make a plan, and being able to take our time and get everything correct. So let's start by looking at the very top. We've got a Windex, which is a little bit loose, but it's not wiggling. We always check the tacking angle indicators. We can clear off spider webs, make sure the lock nut's correctly done here, make sure the set screw is correctly done here. Everything looks good up there. Instrument brackets are okay, fully screwed in on the antenna. Lights feel good. Wind one is in place. We're inspecting the shivs here. These are on this 36.7, the spin halyard comes out of the top of the mast and then travels down through a fair lead down there. These spin shivs are not a great fit. They're actually a little bit too narrow for the shiv box, and so we always want to make sure that the halyard hasn't jumped the shiv. Even if you've got it free, sometimes it can damage the shiv, and so we're going to get this on video and use our Mark 1 finger to make sure everything is turning correctly, nothing feels chipped. So far, so good. We'll do the same on the main halyard and topping lift shivs. These boats are originally spec'd, well, this rig comes with 2 shivs back here. Almost every race boat has gotten rid of the topping lift. Some have gotten rid of the shiv, but this one's kept it, and it's a good idea because you could always run it to the, if something was wrong with this main halyard shiv, you could always run it on the topping lift shiv. As always, we're going to visually and use our hands to check all the pins. This boat was in a collision, which is why we're up here in the first place, so we're checking out this back stay, and we've actually replaced it today. It's been taped back up. Check the toggle. All right, everything at the masthead so far looks good. We'll always do just a check on the surface of the mast, check especially the track at the full hoist and the reef points, and everything looks good. Just a tiny little bit of wear here, but this boat's in great shape up top. All right, next stop, the Hounds. This is a pretty busy area on a lot of boats, and this one's no exception. This is where we have our upper shrouds meeting our forestay tang. We've got our jib halyard shivs. We've got our spin halyard fair leads. Let's start with those. We always want to check fair leads to make sure there's no rough edges or burrs. These are perfect. This fair lead is actually built into the forestay pin. The toggle plugs into the same pin. This one is in good shape. We check the shivs up top, we'll check the shivs down here as well, and I hope you can see this on video, but the 36.7 jib halyard shiv box is a really unusual, not great design, and it's actually wider in the front than it is in the back, so it's very easy to get a Genoa halyard to jump the shiv, especially if you send somebody aloft on the jib halyard. It's very easy to do, and it happens quite a bit. So this boat, we've actually replaced the shiv with a max width shiv. And it helps, but it doesn't prevent the problem. So if you've got one of these boats, always be sure to use a spin halyard or main halyard for going aloft. The funny thing about these is they're actually different widths between the boats too, so you kind of have to measure and get a custom fit shiv. We're going to check out the forestay. This could probably use some tape, but the rig's coming down in a couple weeks anyway. It's going to need a new top spacer tube above the carbo foil. This one's been kind of hoisted up and destroyed. This is a pretty common wear item, because what happens is people hoist the jib, and if there's any friction, sometimes it lifts up on the carbo foil and it jams this up. So using the Harken spacer tube instead of this piece of PVC will actually make it last a little bit longer. We're always checking rod forestays right below the eye fitting here, because that can get kinked when the boats go downwind and the rig comes forward through fracculation or just regular sailing. This one looks fine. We're always checking the top cap. This one is pretty perfect, and on the way down we'll be checking the track itself, but so far so good. One thing to inspect on these masts is the upper shroud tangs, these coquilles or shells. They're not it's not really a great fit for this mast. I hope you can see that there's a little bit of wear where the stem ball here rides on the mast, and it actually, on some boats, has cracked the mast if these aren't installed correctly, and on this one it just wears a little bit. It's always something you have to inspect. If the rig was slack, we could probably check to make sure these stem balls are articulating, but I think that given the fact that this one's got some Tef gel on it, it's been pretty well maintained. That's kind of the theme on this boat, is that they take pretty good care of it, and it's pretty consistently done. Same thing here. A little lower, you'll see there's a whole bunch of wear on the mast. That's from the head of the main at the reef point 1. That's a pretty common thing on these boats because the headboards are metal. Oftentimes the shackles are metal, and when the main's flopped over, it tends to wear. So we'll check that out on the way down. But now let's go down to the second spreader. All right, here we are at the second set of spreaders. These are the top spreaders. There's a couple things we'll look at no matter the boat. We'll always check for play to make sure that the spreader is correctly installed on the root. We'll always check the leading edge, especially for wear or cracking. Sometimes, especially on older boats, you'll see cracks forming right here. It's a high load area, and it's relatively thin metal, that's aluminum that's been formed. We'll always go out to the spreader tip and make sure the spreader tip is solid. This one has a little bit of play, but that's actually normal for the Sparkcraft rig. I would like to see this taped over. It looks like they actually had some tape, but it's being the end of the season, it's kind of worn away. The spreader bend is in the correct spot. The spreader is seated correctly on the bend. That's good. No kinks that we've seen visually on the rod, although it's under a lot of tension, so we probably wouldn't. We'll always check our pins, make sure they're installed in the correct size, make sure they've got cotter pins or rings below. On this one, we can actually spin the rod a little bit, which is nice because we can make sure that those stem balls are turning. If stem balls are neglected too long, they'll kind of seize onto the rod, then you have to sometimes use heat or force to get them free. But again, this boat's pretty well maintained, so I'm not worried about that. Pin's good here. We'll check this spreader tip as well. Same thing, a little bit of play. Looks like their tape's worn off. That's fine, that'll get replaced in the off season. The spreader bend is correct. The spreader's correctly seated on the bend, so no worries there. Let's go down to spreaders 1. All right, first spreader. There's a little bit more going on here than at the second set. The basics remain the same. We're going to wiggle the rig, make sure the spreaders are seated correctly on the root. We're going to check the trailing and leading edges for any damage or cracking. We're going to check the stem balls. Oh, I can actually spin these. This boat's, again, really well maintained, so everything's greased up correctly. We've got Tef gel going in there. I can actually feel it. We're going to check the rivets on the spreader roots, make sure nothing's peeling away from the mast. No issues there. Over here, this is not a trouble spot, but a complicated area that takes some attention in the off season. This is the spreader tip, and this is the spreader tip cup. I can see the spreader tip itself is seated correctly. Some boats have had some issues with the tip cups either spinning or coming loose. This one does not look to have that, but what you want to do is you want to check and make sure this large lock nut is seated correctly. There's no space above or below the spreader tip cup washer or the spreader tip cup itself. This looks good. You want to make sure the set screws are seated correctly. Every year you should be taking these apart and servicing them. This boat, I think they've been doing that, or at least every other year, because everything turns okay. It's a little noisy, so we'd like to take this apart in the off season, clean everything, and then re-grease everything. This should have a little bit of Tef gel on it just to make it easier to adjust, but everything here is correct. The rod can rotate, the stud can rotate, it's pinned correctly. They've even got this little dynamic keeper here to keep the chute from dropping in, which is great. Everything on this side looks good. We'll go over, do the starboard spreader. Same thing here. Everything looks like it's rotating correctly. This could probably use a rebuild, just Tef gel in the off season. One thing to look out for that we've seen a lot on the 40.7 more than the 36.7 is this rod nose sometimes isn't held in with Loctite correctly, so it can unscrew. It's a little scary to find that if you see like most of the threads showing, because that could, you know, if it's loose on the leeward side, articulating like that and shaking, it can totally back out. So always make sure these are socketed all the way down. Should be Loctite holding that in place. This one looks fine, but same thing, we just check and make sure nothing's able to rotate, nothing's coming loose, spreader tip is secured, and this rig's in great shape.